ask, Mr. Chairman, I ask for a unanimous consent to submit 20-plus statements for the record from a wide range of organizations against the reinstatement of this program, including from the Nonpartisan American Immigration Council, Church World Services, and the International Refugee Assistance Project.
Without objection.
Mr. Isaacson, can you start by telling us who actually benefited the most from the Remain in Mexico policy?
So the biggest financial benefit definitely went to the cartels, who suddenly had this large base of people they could extort.
So could you walk us through what it looked like when an asylum seeker was returned to Mexico under the Remain in Mexico policy?
It's pretty vivid. And actually, even if you or I were to walk across the port of entry into a town like Matamoros or Reynosa, you would see cartel spies everywhere. You would see people, a nice man in a suit just standing there. He's looking to see who's crossing. The guy selling tamales on the bridge, he's looking to see who's crossing. Now imagine you're somebody who is maybe wearing DHS-issued sweatpants and maybe a bag that says DHS on it, or shoes with no shoelaces on them. You are immediately seen as somebody who is ripe to be kidnapped. It's widely known that the first half hour after being returned to Mexico from MPP, always at the same exit, usually roughly at the same time of day, was a very dangerous time for you. And then you would be in a shelter, sometimes U.S. funded, sometimes a government-run shelter, sometimes charity-run, and it was pretty clear that you could not leave unless you had made an extortion payment to the hotel, to the cartels.
Mm-hmm. So how does this type of activity that you've just described, taking place right across from the border, how does that impact our national security?
By enriching the cartels and giving them a new income stream, it strongly impacts our national security. We do not want transnational organized crime to be wealthier, that close to our borderline. And in the recent years, even since, as we've had higher numbers of migrants coming, it's become bigger and bigger business for the cartels. And instead of mom and pop smugglers, we now have Sinaloa and Jalisco and La Linea and other major national cartels in Mexico running the business and fighting each other for it. And that just makes it more dangerous for the United States.
Yeah, and the money the cartels are raising here, getting enriched because of this policy, they use to basically increase their other operations, like sending fentanyl across the border to poison our kids and our people.
Yeah, it costs only about $60,000 to set up a fentanyl lab. So what they're making from that extortion money could be reinvested in that.
Actually helps their drug trafficking in the United States.
It's all fungible.
So, Mr. Isaacson, can Remain in Mexico policy even be re-implemented without the cooperation of the government of Mexico?
I mean, it involves sending people to Mexico's sovereign territory, so I don't know how you could send people back without Mexico eventually noticing that you're doing that.
That's for sure. So, as we know, the cartels have long made money off of the smuggling routes to the United States, but how did cartels exploit the Remain in Mexico policy to threaten them? You've talked a little bit about that, but maybe elaborate more.
How did they use the policy to threaten people? They knew that people had a date by which they had to get back to the port of entry. They had an appointment. They had to be there. And boy, does that make them motivated to pay more, to have to call more of their relatives and get that ransom money wired, which of course is a crime that involves U.S. soil, somebody on U.S. soil having to wire the money. It made them more motivated and raised the prices that they could charge. Mm-hmm.
So we've seen changes in migration patterns worldwide recently, and during the initial implementation of Remain in Mexico, my understanding is that a significant portion of migrants encountered were from Mexico or Central America.
Right.
How would today's migration flows, because we live in a different world today, how would that impact Mexico's ability to accommodate a new Remain in Mexico?
Yeah, as late as 2020, 90% of your migrants were from 4 countries, Mexico and the so-called Northern Triangle of Central America. Now that's only 52% of the total. You've got a United Nations of people coming here. Last year, 1 in 9 were not even from this hemisphere. And that's because new routes have opened up, like the Darien Gap or Nicaragua, and that does mean you have a lot more nationalities that Mexico might be required to accept. Is Mexico going to take Chinese people, Indians, Bangladeshis, or even people from Brazil or Haiti who don't really speak Spanish? That would be a huge issue to have to negotiate with the Mexicans.
So my last question, my remaining time here, Ms. Isaacson, what policies, because we want to address border security. It's absolutely essential that we do that. So what do you believe the U.S. can implement, along with our other partners, to proactively address these worldwide migration trends that have changed dramatically over the last few years?
Well, imagine we had an asylum system that could hand out decisions in a matter of months, with full due process and fairly, but had that capacity. You'd have a lot fewer people trying to attempt to enter that system if they knew that the decision would be turned around that way. You're not sitting here 5 years with a work permit and able to decide. Imagine you had a program like CBP-1 that actually made a lot of these entries and waits in Mexico. It's not a perfect program, but it did make it more orderly. That would free up a lot more Border Patrol agents to be on the line instead of having to do this processing.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think by now most people have seen this chart.